Hello and welcome aboard. My name is Alma, and this is One Left Inboard. On today's episode of One Left Inboard, we are talking all things commuting. We're going to talk about what that is, how you do it, if it's good, if it's bad, and all of the other details surrounding commuting. A little bit about me. I am a flight attendant for a mainline legacy carrier based here in the U.S., and I have been a flight attendant for 2 years. Speaking of today's podcast topic, commuting, I was a commuter for several months when I first became a flight attendant. A couple of things that you may be curious about before we dive into any examples and deeper into that commuting topic. One, commuting for the purpose of this conversation is not hopping in a vehicle or public transportation and going from your home to the daycare you work at, the bar that you attend, the restaurant that you serve at, the hospital, etc. It is hopping on a plane and going from the city that you live, that may or may not also be a base for your airline, to the city that you work, which is obviously is a base, and it's where you are based, and it's an airplane ride away, a minimum of one airplane ride. So we'll also talk about things like crash pads, what they are. We'll talk briefly about that, as well as why would your layover hotels be covered by your airline and your crash pad hotels, apartments, or houses not be, when it's all about you being at work. So to dive right into commuting, as I mentioned, an airplane ride to work. About 50% of flight attendants live in a city that is not where they're based. Sometimes it's a city with a nice airport that offers direct flights to the city you are based in. Even cooler, you may live in a city that is a base for flight attendants for your airline. And other times you live in a very rural area where you would then drive to not the biggest airport, where you might even have to get on 2 planes to get where you are based. When I commuted, I only took one airplane in. It was 2.5 hours. I had about 4 flights a day to choose from. So commuting is a trip that you are not paid for. That is one flight that you are not going to be on the clock. You do have to book a jump seat or get available space. And if you know anything, if you have read or watched or heard anything about non-revenue standby travel for active flight attendants, pilots, or their pass riders, these flights are often booked by paying customers, and they can be tight to squeeze on. So oftentimes, instead of sitting like a passenger, your best option is going to be to book that jump seat. You can book a jump seat for my particular airline that I work for on your work device. It is in an app that does know when you're working. So if you're in a highly commuted route, then you really need to be, as soon as those seats drop available for flight attendants to snag, you have to be available in that app to do so. Otherwise, in that highly commuted route, you'll be 5-10 minutes after those seats have become available and they are all gone. You will see all the flights and how many jump seats were available, and were is past tense because they are all gone. So that can be a challenge for not so highly commuted routes. It's not a terrible thing. And when I was commuting, I don't particularly remember not being able to get the jump seat. I do remember having to sit the jump seat. So before I go heavily into that, I would like to just give you a little detail about that jump seating process. When you head into the airport to jump seat on your commuting flight, you can be, for my airline, in business casual or your uniform. The thing about being in business casual is if you do get randomly selected for a secondary screening. So when you're a flight attendant, you are a known crew member, you have your own security access point that you share with pilots and other known crew members. You'll go in, you'll show them your badge and other forms of ID, and they'll welcome, thank you, hello, goodbye. Other times their system will randomly select you for a secondary screening. You will put all of your bags on that belt, just like a passenger. And if you are in uniform, you won't have to take your shoes off unless they do go off on the metal detector. But if you are in plain clothes, you will have to take those off. Another thing, if you have larger shampoos or liquids, aerosols, etc., in uniform, you are allowed to keep them. When you're in business casual, they will take your Moroccan oil dry shampoo that you just bought, and they'll throw it away at Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas, Nevada. Very specific. Ask me how I know. Very sad. So it's often, as much as you are in the public eye and you need to maintain your appearance and your uniform compliance, it is so much easier to be in uniform when you jump seat. When you do jump seat, sometimes flight attendants will be like, hey, there's an open seat over there at 10E if you would like it. Other times there's not an open seat anywhere, and you will sit there on the jump seat feeling very in the way and feeling so awkward and in the way. Other times they'll ask you to leave that jump seat that's in the back of the aircraft that you had a little privacy in, and they'll sit you at one of those fun jump seats that directly face the passengers. And that is where you'll be while they do their service. And sometimes until just before landing when you take that jump seat you were assigned. So while I don't want to paint a horror show about it, it is less than comfortable. For me, I knew that I wanted to be a flight attendant. I had picked the brain and talked the ear off of many a flight attendant and got a lot of inside details. And so I was prepared for what commuting was. And I knew that the moment I didn't have to do it, I would no longer do it. And as once experience was under my belt, that sentiment held true. And no matter taking less awesome trips, oddly structured trips, early reports, late releases, reserve days until my 103rd birthday, I decided that commuting was not for me. But for some people, it works. So I just wanted to give you that process, but not discourage you from taking those jump seats and commuting if you have to. As far as what will you do once you're there, you're going to need a place to rest your head. So you'll need a crash pad, and that's just a place that you have access to. Sometimes it's a hotel, and with these hotels, there are two different versions. It's a hotel room. It's not the same one every time. They have a shuttle, coffee in the morning. They have flexible check-in and check-out times, and sometimes that same thing applies, but it is the same hotel room. No one ever else goes in there except for maybe a couple of flight attendants that you split the cost of this room with. Then there are apartments, houses, and other domiciles that people who own these properties have turned into crash pads. Many flight attendants, often more than 10, will pay a smaller amount than establishing residency in that city, but you all will pay a smaller amount and have a certain predetermined, pre-discussed amount of nights per month of access to that place. Once the flight attendant, this imaginary flight attendant, once you're there at your crash pad, typically it's because your rotation has started, will start too early in the morning on the day it starts for you to fly into that airport without risking any delays or performance development. So you go ahead and go in the night before, but you don't need a $180 hotel room. You just need to lay your head. You need to get up, shower, and head on to the airport. And same thing when your rotation ends at the end of that trip. You may miss your flight home because you've released too late, and you need a place to stay that night as well. So a crash pad is where you would do that. Just very simple going in. Sometimes you might be on reserve days and you may not get a trip, or you may be waiting around and not know what the trip might be. That is where you're going to be spending your time. That's where many flight attendants and pilots spend their time, is their crash pad. As far as why would your hotel on a layover be covered by your airline, but your crash pad wouldn't be? I think it's it's incredibly understandable for actively employed flight attendants, but for hopefuls, describing this, I feel like I confused myself, but here is the best way that I can kind of try to make it make sense. So if you are starting a rotation, you fly, you lay over, and you're at a hotel, that hotel is covered by your airline. The next day, you leave that hotel, fly, lay over again, and that hotel is also covered. Your crash pad the night before is not. But let's say you lived in base. You started your rotation in Salt Lake City, Utah. That is where you were based, but you decided to live there, or you already lived there. Then your airline isn't going to cover a night's worth of rent for you to have been close enough to make it to the airport, to make it to work. And it's not a spiteful or punitive thing. It's just that your crash pad is on you. At least for my airline, they impress upon you to relocate to your base, but they do understand that you might not. And they do tell you that if you don't, the all cost incurred for commuting into work is on you. So I'm going to give you a sample schedule and we'll just talk this out and you will have a better understanding of what commuting is. So you are starting a rotation on Wednesday. You will start that rotation at 8 a.m. You'll fly, lay over, fly, lay over, fly, and you will be back in base at 9 p.m. unless you have any delays. So for an example, I will say, let's just say Houston, Texas. Let's say you live in Houston, but you are based in Atlanta is a good base for many airlines. So let's say Atlanta. So 8 a.m., you've checked the flights. There's a flight that gets you in at like 7:15, but you're still on probation and you're a little afraid of any delays causing you not to get to your gate, get signed in on time. You actually travel a lot right now. It's what has inspired you to become a flight attendant. And a few times you've landed and heard, "Ladies and gentlemen from the flight deck, we've got you into Atlanta 11 minutes early. Unfortunately, there's an aircraft occupying our gate. We just heard from the tower. They should be pushing back any moment now. As soon as they push back and get out of there, we'll have you parked at the gate with that seatbelt signed off and the doors will open shortly thereafter. Thank you so much for your patience." Sometimes this is a 3 to 5 minute delay. Sometimes this is a 10 to 15 minutes delay. And other times there are just air traffic control pacings that there's an endless amount of delays that you could face, and you know that. And so you have decided to go in Tuesday. You look at the flights and there are a few in the evening, and that's what you want. You don't want to eat into that entire Tuesday that you have at home, but you also don't want to take the last one out in case of delays, as we just discussed. So you take the third to last out. You are going to leave at about 5 p.m. and you're going to get to Atlanta at 7. I have no idea if that's accurate flight time. Sorry. You're going to get there at 7. So you pack all of your things and you look at your schedule, and for Friday, when you get back, you release at 9 and there are no more flights for you to make it home. So you're already going ahead and booking that jump seat for Saturday morning. You are going to stay Tuesday night and Friday night. You will be away. There are chances you'll have crew meals, but you're going to go ahead and pack your food, enough clothes, and you're going to try to stay active while you're gone, both at your crash pad and on your layover. So you pack your sneakers and any other like resistance bands and stuff. Cool. You have all this luggage to be gone for 5 days. You get it into your car. Your best friend drops you off at the airport. You reassemble all that luggage. Get it on through known crew member security, or if you're a randomed regular security, reassemble it, hopefully you've signed in before that actually, and head to the gate of your commuting flight. You now sit the jump seat, that unfortunately you are unable to not have to. There are no available seats, so you will sit that jump seat. All your luggage is in that overhead bin. You take it back down. You have arrived. You're in the way back where that spare jump seat was. You come off the aircraft. Now you will have to get to your crash pad. If it's a crash pad hotel, most of them have shuttles. The one that I stayed in certainly had a shuttle, and it ran like clockwork. However, that was getting to the airport. Coming back to the crash pad, I would call and they'd say, "Are you outside?" And I would say yes. And then 20 minutes later, nothing. And I'd call back. And sometimes, you're tired and you have to wait for 30 plus minutes. But getting there was very trustworthy. And oftentimes that is the most important when you first start, is just not being late or missing anything. And you will take the personal hit elsewhere on your rest time. Now, if it is a house or apartment, your price will go up if the owner is the owner operator of the crash pad and they have a system in which you are able to book them for rides to and from the airport. I don't know many flight attendants that have these. I think it's because that price increases and they're just trying to save as much money as possible. So you may have to Uber, or with all that luggage, take public transportation. So you decide which one you're going to do and you arrive. You're trying to be ever so quiet because there are other people there. So earlier I said it's about 10 to 14 other crew members. The odds of all of you occupying that crash pad at once is very slim, but the odds of 0 other crew members being there is also very slim. The odds are very slim. So you are going to try to be quiet. You get there, you're trying to decompress, and you're super nervous. You keep double checking that you've set alarms, and you've set multiple alarms. Those alarms go off. You shower quietly, get dressed, quietly drag your luggage out, and arrange whatever transportation to the airport you work at. Boom, it is 8 a.m. You have successfully checked into your flight. So earlier when you were checking in, I just meant checking into your commuting flight, not signing into your rotation. If you are jump seating, you cannot, for my airline anyway, let me specify, we cannot check ourselves in for that commuting flight for some reason. We have to go to the gate and speak to someone. But if you are non-revving, you can check into that flight. So just a little tidbit, just a little side note on that one. Now you are actively working, so you sign into your rotation. You've made it. You're there at the gate. You fly, lay over, fly, lay over, and fly, and you've landed back. Now, mind you, while you were away, you had some food that you had to keep cold. You were meal prepping. You had 5 days worth of food. You've had to do things like load ice back into there, ask the receptionist at the hotels if they can freeze those little ice packs that you have for you. And you've just been doing your due diligence. You still have a meal left over. You eat dinner in your crash pad, hotel or apartment or house. And you set your alarm for that 6 a.m. return flight. So that, as you know, that doesn't mean that you're getting up at 6. That means that you're up much earlier, making sure you've packed everything, excuse the noise, making sure you packed everything, didn't leave anything behind in your crash pad, and you head on for your commuting flight. Let's say that we're going to be nice to you, and we are going to say that you don't have to sit the jump seat, and you actually get to take a little nap. You are in uniform, and some passengers wonder why the flight attendant's sleeping, but it's not on the jump seat, so they keep their mouth shut. You may or may not end up on some Reddit or social media page saying, "Why is this flight attendant sleeping?" only to have the original poster be roasted in the comments about, "Hello, they're in a passenger seat. Mind your own business." Anyway, moving right along, you look at your schedule as you're getting on the plane, and you've remembered this. You knew, because you are a responsible flight attendant, but you have a working rotation reporting on Sunday. So the night before, you still decided, well, it's Sunday at 5 p.m. is my sign-in time. I can make the first flight. I'll be home before 9. I can plant those little tomato seedlings that I started from scratch. I can get the dog a haircut. I can make my own meals. I can wash all these dirty dishes from my meal prep. refresh my uniform supply, etc. I was at a cold place on this layover. I'm going to be at a warm place on this next rotation. I can revamp my bag. Sunday before I head out, same day commute. I'm going to have an early lunch, late breakfast with Bay, and I'll head on in and make it. And let's just say that you do all of those things. At 11, you're wrapping up your late breakfast with your babe, and they drop you off at the airport. You had 3 flights to choose from. You chose the earliest of those 3 flights to get you in at least by like 3:15 in case any delays, and you've made it. Now you go sit in the lounge, try to take a nap, what have you, until that rotation starts. And let's say it all worked out. That is still 1.5 days home. That is still very unappealing to me personally. A lot of people make it work for them. I totally understand that. So you may have been wondering how bases have worked while I've been discussing all of this stuff about commuting. We described a little bit about a few different things, and I just gave you a rotation 2 that you successfully held, and you made it and you did it. You may be wondering about, what do I mean to be based somewhere? So I think in the example, I said that you lived in Houston and that you were based in Atlanta. So Houston is a base, I'm sure, for multiple airlines, but let's just say for the argument of, or, for the sake rather, we're not arguing, are we? Oh my God. Are you mad at me? For the sake of this discussion, your airline does not have a base in Houston, Texas. So you live there. It's a nice airport. You see a lot of major airlines flying out of it, but just to know that is not where you start your rotation. And so even though you get on a plane and you don't get paid and you have to go to another place to work, or not even though, rather, but you may be wondering, when does the pay start and what is the meaning of being based? But I live in Houston and I can get a direct flight to blah, blah, blah. Aren't there flight attendants that live here and work that flight to blah, blah, blah? It's dicey to explain. I will do my best. Okay. So if you are based in Atlanta, when your rotation is built to fly, layover, fly, layover, that's a 3-day trip. You might have certainly, I'm sure for most airlines, they have a go and come back, which is referred to as a turn. Go to a city. You either wait around for your next working flight or you don't. And if you don't, the people come off the plane and more people come on and you head right back to your base. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 hours before, everybody is off the plane, but you have 2 or 3 hours before you head back. There are 2-day trips, fly, layover, fly, back home or back in base. They're structured very differently, but let's just go with a 3-day rotation. I think it's what we're most all familiar with. They build them and they start and end at the same airport. And that is an airport that is a base for flight attendants for your airline. And that is not always going to be a very accessible place to some people. I think I use the example of Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm so sorry. It might be like an up and coming city, but that airport may be very tiny and it may get you, I'm sure Little Rock to Atlanta is not bad, but let's just say if you were based in New York City, you may not have a direct flight out to New York City. You might have to first connect in Atlanta, and that would be a double commute. So being based somewhere is where you start and end your rotation. When you start your actual work as a flight attendant, where you are working that flight, you are being paid then. Just another little side note. So why would flight attendants choose to do this? There are many reasons. Some people have elderly parents that they're caring for that live in the city that they live in, and they can't uproot and move to their base. For me, the base that I first was assigned to when I began flight attending, if it's a verb. It was just too cold for me. I was not interested in living in that area. I did not want to live there. And I knew that eventually I would be transferred to the city I lived in, which was a base for me, is a base for flight attendants for my airline. Some people don't. Like, again, if I'm using the example for Houston, for my specific airline and the airline in this made up schedule I just assigned to you, it is not a base for flight attendants for said airline. And maybe you live there, your parents live there, your best friend from high school, you love your hometown, your kids are in school and you don't want to change their school district. Some flight attendants are helping their children with their grandchildren. So they'll just do go away on the weekend because the parents are off on the weekend, and they help with the children throughout the week, etc. I mean, it's an endless amount of possibilities of why people cannot uproot themselves and move, or why they don't want to uproot themselves and move. There's also an interesting situation where when we do live in a base, but we are not assigned to that base because our schedules would be better elsewhere. So for instance, for me, many people live here and could be based here. And on days that they are off and have the free time, they might pick up a little go and come back turn for extra money, but they are not based here. They commute elsewhere for better schedules because either they're junior or hella senior or whatever it is, their schedule is nicer. They may not have reserve days. They might have beautiful, luxurious international flying that they want to do. They might have a specific layover domestic. They might even be able to lay over at home and still be with their families or friends, etc. So there are reasons people would live in not only a city that they're not based in, but a city that they could be based in, and then choose to commute elsewhere for better schedules or the removal of reserve from their schedules. That's another thing to consider too. I will just wrap up one more additional from me, from the crowd. When you live in a place that is not a base for flight attendants, you are almost guaranteed to not commute into your base for high time turns. So we are compensated for more than just our time once the door closes. We're compensated in multiple different ways, but our largest pay rate is when we are actively flying. And so anytime you can get work in one day that is more than, I would say, about 6.5 hours. And I say that number because the average 3-day trip, at least for my airline, is structured to be about, I mean, there are some less and some more, about 18 hours of flight time a day, or of rotation rather. So that's about 6 hours a day. And so if you can find anything more than 6.5 hours, then you've really kind of pulled off a neat little money hack. It's a very profitable day, especially for mainline carriers. My airline in particular, seniors can really be having over $800 for a duty period that is not even 14 hours long. And they didn't have to perform surgery, take their clothes off, hurt anyone, or be a part of a heist. I mean, it's crazy. So if you're not living in a base, that's something you're not going to commute in and then do the work and then commute back. It's either too risky for your commuting flight times or impossible because of your commuting flight times. Or just something that I don't know that any of us have the energy to do. So that is another downside for me. Now, I do live in a city that I'm based in that is obviously a base for flight attendants. So if I were still having to commute, I could take some of those chunks of days off that I have in between rotations and fill them in with those trips I was talking about, or even pick up entire 2 and 3 day rotations from flight attendants that don't want them, and just add some money to the month without having to worry about crash pad the night before, potentially crash pad the night upon return. And it just makes it much, much easier. So that is why, it's amazing to live in a city that you work in. And then furthermore, if as a commuter, it's really a treat if you live in a city that is a base, even if you're not based there. I'm sure that I'm missing something, but this episode has already gone into 30 minutes. I don't want to keep you any longer. I'm already so happy to have had you here with me. My name is Alma, and this was One Left Inboard.